Imagine standing in the middle of a vast, silent wilderness with a single bullet left in your revolver. You aren't pointing it at an outlaw or a predator or an enemy. You are pointing it at yourself. And in that moment, pulling the trigger is the most profound act of self-love you could possibly commit. Welcome to the American Vault. Hollywood sold you a myth of quick draws and cinematic sunsets. But the reality of the frontier was a calculated biological nightmare, a world where a gunshot wound was the easy way out. Today, we are peeling back the skin of history to examine the 10 most horrifying ways the West actually killed you. From the madness of the frozen peaks to the 72-hour shutdown of the high desert. By the time we reach the #1 spot, you will understand. You will understand why the strongest men in history prayed for the mercy of the lead. Number 10. The Dissolution. In the winter of 1848, survival wasn't about grit. It was about the slow, agonizing collapse of your own cellular structure. Imagine being trapped in a cabin for months, the snow burying your world in white silence. Your body begins to crave what it cannot find. Then, the horror starts. Your old scars, wounds you received 10 years ago, begin to turn soft. The connective tissue simply dissolves, reopening the traumas of your past as if they happened yesterday. Your gums turn into black, rotting sponges. Your teeth loosen and fall out into your hand during a meal. This was scurvy. It wasn't just a lack of fruit. It was your body literally coming apart at the seams. Internal hemorrhaging turns your legs into bruised, swollen pillars of pain. You don't die in a duel. You die in the dark, watching your own body turn into a liquid ruin. Number 9. The living Inferno. The Great Plains were a sea of golden grass, but in a dry season, they became a massive fuse. A single lightning strike could ignite a wall of fire that stretched for miles. It moved faster than a thoroughbred at full gallop. The sound wasn't just a crackle, it was a roar that vibrated in your very bones. If the wind shifted, there was no outrunning it. The heat would sear the lining of your lungs before the flames even touched your hair. Frontiersmen would desperately try to start backfires to create a circle of safety. But many were found as huddled, blackened husks in the middle of a scorched wasteland. A death where your final breath is a lungful of 1,000-degree air. But fire was predictable. Our next file explores a death that was much more patient. Number 8. The liquid rot. A sudden, dry rattle in the sagebrush. A strike faster than a human heartbeat. In the 1870s, a rattlesnake bite was a countdown to a grotesque transformation. Without anti-venom, the hemotoxin began to digest you while you were still conscious. Your limb would swell until the skin literally split under the pressure. Necrosis would turn your healthy flesh into a foul, green liquid within hours. The smell was so potent it would make a seasoned scout gag. You would lie in the back of a jolting wagon for days, watching the black rot creep up your arm or leg, heading straight for your heart, praying for a fever to take your mind before the infection took your life. Number 7. The living ghost. We've all seen the dramatic scenes of scalping in the movies, but Hollywood always cuts away before the true nightmare begins. Scalping was rarely an instant death sentence, and for men like Robert McGee, that was the ultimate curse. Imagine waking up in the freezing mud, the top of your skull exposed to the open air. The protective layer of your brain, the dura mater, pulsing visibly with every heartbeat. There were no antibiotics to stop the inevitable fungal growth on the bone. no morphine to dull the sensation of the wind hitting your exposed nerves. You became a living ghost, an outcast who had to wrap his head in leather to hide the sight of his own exposed skeleton. Weeks of agony followed by a slow, septic decline. It was a message sent by the enemy that some things are far worse than dying. Number 6. The deceptive warmth. In the high Sierras, the cold doesn't just freeze you, it lies to you. As hypothermia reaches its final stage, your brain undergoes a terrifying malfunction. Your core temperature drops so low that your blood vessels suddenly dilate. A rush of warm blood hits your skin, and your dying mind is convinced that you are burning up. This is paradoxical undressing. Victims have been found miles from their camps, naked in the snow. They stripped off their heavy coats and boots in a frantic attempt to cool down. They didn't die fighting the winter. They died welcoming it, digging into the snow with their bare fingernails. Search parties would find them months later, blue statues, half naked, with a smile of pure, shivering delirium. Number 5. The Alkaline Betrayal. The desert is a master of irony. After 3 days of walking under a sun that wants to kill you, you find it. A pool of crystal-clear water shimmering in the basin. You dive in, desperate for a single drop of life. But the water is thick with lye, arsenic, and salt. It doesn't hydrate you, it poisons you. The first swallow sears your throat like molten lead. Within minutes, your stomach is cramping so violently, you can hear your own muscles tearing. You die of internal hemorrhaging, vomiting your own blood into the very pool that promised to save you. A chemical trap set by the earth itself. Number 4. The animal within. It started with a minor nip from a skunk or a bat while you slept by the campfire. A tiny wound you barely noticed the next morning. But 2 weeks later, the world begins to tilt. Hydrophobia. The pioneers knew this was the most terrifying descent into madness known to man. You are burning with a thirst that feels like fire. But the sight, or even the sound of water, sends your throat into violent, agonizing spasms. Your body rebels against its most basic need. You begin to foam at the mouth, your mind shattering as the virus eats your nervous system alive. You become a rabid animal trapped inside a human body. There was no cure, only a locked room and a friend who loved you enough to use a pillow before the madness became total. Number 3. The rusty choice. On the frontier, a simple splinter or a nick from a dirty knife was a death sentence. Without penicillin, the black rot, gangrene, ruled the trail. It started as a dull ache. Then a sweet, sickly smell of decay began to rise from your wound. Then the skin turned a bruised purple, and finally, an oily, midnight black. The only way to stop the rot was the bone saw. Imagine biting down on a piece of leather while a drunken cook uses a rusty blade on your thigh. No anesthesia, just the sound of steel rasping against your bone. If you survived the shock, you still had to survive the infection that followed. Many men looked at the saw, then looked at their revolver. And they chose the bullet. Number 2. The earth in your lungs. In the plains, the wind is a weapon. It carries the fine, volcanic silt of the dry earth. If you were caught in a dust storm without a wet cloth, you were breathing in ground glass. The dust settled in your lungs and turned into a heavy, suffocating mud. This was dust pneumonia. You would spend weeks in a sod house, gasping for air that wasn't there. It was like drowning on dry land. Each breath was a struggle against the weight of the earth building up inside your chest. A slow, rhythmic choking that lasted until your heart finally gave up. Number 1. The 72-hour shutdown. This is the peak of the vault's darkest files. The reason the desert is called the Devil's Playground. Dehydration in the high desert is a systematic forensic shutdown of the human machine. Hour 24. Your saliva turns into a thick, bitter paste. Your tongue swells until it fills your entire mouth, forcing your jaw open. You can no longer swallow. Hour 48. Your blood thickens like sludge. Your heart thumps violently against your ribs, trying to pump a fluid that has turned to syrup. Your vision shatters. You see lakes of gold and hear the voices of dead relatives calling your name from the dunes. Your skin turns a ghastly, translucent gray. Hour 72, the final stage. Your brain literally begins to shrink away from the walls of your skull. Capillaries burst in your eyes, turning them a solid, terrifying red. You lose the ability to sweat. Your skin cracks open like old parchment, and you begin to scream. But no sound comes out. Your vocal cords are as dry as the sand beneath your feet. You are a biological engine seizing up in the center of a furnace. In the absolute silence of the Mojave, as the vultures begin their slow, graceful descent, the realization hits you too late. A bullet would have been a mercy. A bullet would have been a gift. The American West was won not just by the brave, but by those who could endure the unthinkable. The next time you watch a Hollywood gunfight, remember the archives. Remember the silence of the desert and the slow rot of the plains. Because out here, the greatest legend wasn't the man who won the duel. It was the man who didn't have to suffer the alternative. The vault is closed for today, but the files of the frontier are endless. If you have the stomach for the truth, subscribe and step inside.
Subscribe to the American Vault. Turn on the notifications, because in a world of shadows, the only thing more dangerous than the truth is not knowing it at all. See you in the next file.